Hi everyone, my name is Raquel Smith, and this is my presentation on critical whiteness studies and the importance of accomplices, an interview with my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Payne. I would like to give some background before I begin. I decided to interview my teacher for this presentation because of the profound impact that she had on me as a child. Mrs. Payne was my kindergarten teacher at St. Jerome's School in El Cerrito in 1993. She taught every child to treat others with love, kindness, and respect, to go out of our way to stand up for others. She taught us about the injustices that non-white people faced and were facing. We learned songs from the civil rights movement and sang them what seemed like every day with her. She would have demonstrations where she would segregate us kids to show us how ridiculous and unfair it was. We learned about Black inventors, abolitionists, and athletes and their contributions to society. We learned about the violence and hate that they experienced. She was extremely involved in our school's community, and these lessons continued throughout my education until I left in the 8th grade. I believe that children need to learn our country's real history, that hate is taught, not inherent, and we should be modeling kindness, empathy, and compassion for the children in our communities. My reason for interviewing my teacher is not so much to highlight her, but to realize that we all have an impact, can have an impact, and make a difference, just as she did for me. Discussion questions. Number 1, how can white people begin conversations about race with other white people? 2, in what ways can white people be allies and accomplices and hold other white people accountable? What does this accountability look like? Number 3, if you are white, what actionable steps can you take to be an ally? Key concepts: an ally. To be an ally is the process of a self-awareness to unlearn internalized white supremacy and oppression. An accomplice assists others in creating a space of safety, equity, and inclusion, and puts oneself at risk. What is critical whiteness studies? It is the field that examines how whiteness and white supremacy create and maintain systems of structure and power. So I emailed my teacher, told her about this project, sent her a list of questions, and she emailed her answers back to me. So I will read the questions that I asked her along with her response. Where were you born? I was born in Kaiser Hospital in Oakland in 1951. Can you tell me a bit about your family growing up? Would you say you were raised in an anti-racist household? I was raised in El Cerrito, and all my neighbors were white. The first Black family moved into my court when I was a freshman in college. I don't remember having many discussions growing up about race. One memory I do have is when my dad's older sister and her husband came to visit. We were all watching a track meet on TV. My uncle called a Black runner the N-word. I don't know if I'd ever heard it before, but my father told my uncle he could not stay in our house and use that kind of language. My uncle thought he was kidding, but my dad was dead serious, and that made a huge impression on me. When there were riots in Richmond during the 1960s, my parents explained to my siblings and me that things were not fair for the Black people who lived in Richmond. Busing was a big issue then, and my parents went to meetings to support better education for the students in the poorer areas of Richmond. Where did you attend college, and what was your major? I attended college at San Jose State University, and I majored in Black Studies. I was the only white person in most of my classes, and the only white person the year I graduated who had majored in Black Studies. Is there a geopolitical moment from your childhood or early adult life that changed how you viewed the world or that you felt impacted you personally? When I took Black history classes, I was horrified by what I didn't know and how terrible life had been and still was for so many African American people. I visited low-income areas in the San Jose areas, which were mostly African American. I remember one home that had no furniture except a mattress and a lamp. I felt so privileged and disgusted at the same time and vowed to do something with my life. What led you to teaching? I've always wanted to be a teacher ever since I was a little girl. I wanted to teach 5th grade. I thought that was the best age to teach because I could actually have discussions with the students. I taught for 13 years before I came to St. Jerome's School, and I did get to teach 5th graders. But my last year in Oakland was in kindergarten, and I really found my true calling. So that's where I stayed for the next 29 years. Would you consider yourself an activist, and if so, what led you down this path? Yes, I would consider myself an activist. I marched in San Francisco a number of times against the Vietnam War. I marched also in San Francisco more than once for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and against the violence in the southern part of the United States and for getting voting rights for all people. My older brother was also involved with these marches, and we talked about the injustices and how marching was a way to let the African American people in the South know we cared. I would see things on TV, like people being sprayed with fire hoses or them setting the dogs on people just for marching and dragging them to jail, not to mention those who were never seen again. As a white woman, what do you think your role is when it comes to being an ally for historically marginalized communities? As a white woman, I see my role as very important. First thing, we white people, have to admit the wrongs that our country has done, beginning with stealing the land from the Native Americans, slavery, Japanese internment, and how we are treating the immigrants today. None of this is pretty, but it is true and is part of our heritage as a country. I also vote in every election, and I write postcards to voters to remind them to vote. I am also talking to people all the time about the injustices that are going on in our country. As a teacher, what anti-racist work or action took place in your classroom? As a teacher at St. Jerome's, I was very proud of our multiracial student body. I always initiated the presentations on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. January holiday. That was very important to me. And I always started with, do you know why Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was so important? As a class, we acted out class segregation and sit-ins so the kindergarten students would really comprehend how outrageous segregation was. I also taught a lot of freedom songs. I taught them to the entire school. Then in February, I was in charge of Black History Month, and I always did something a little different each year. This was important not to only tell about slavery then and then modern history, but also the inventions that were created by African Americans. Those were things I'd never heard about growing up, and it was important for the Black children to hear and have pride in their race, and for the white children to hear and understand how Black people did contribute to our culture and society. So it's their culture and society as well. Did you participate in anti-racist work outside of the classroom, and if so, what? While my children were growing up, I joined some groups to talk about injustices and what can be done. What did it mean to you to be a white educator fighting for social justice? As a white educator fighting for social injustice, it meant that I was always looking for books that expressed social justice to read to the children. I had many multicultural books and books that showed all kinds of families. If something was happening in the news that was important, I would bring it up and talk about it. And many Black parents thanked me for being so open about what was going on in the world. Were there any pivotal moments that emphasized your journey? I recall that I had taken a Black psychology class, and on the first day there were 4 white people. The professor said that the Black people were all going to start out with an A, but if they didn't do the work, they could end up with an F. But the white people were going to start out with an F and see what happens. Well, I knew that he couldn't give me an F for no reason, so I came back to the class on the second day. But I was the only white person to show back up. I stayed the whole semester. Towards the end of the semester, the professor was calling each person alphabetically to come to the podium and talk about some experience they had being Black in America. My name was Peggy Walton, so obviously I was at the end of the alphabet, and I was thinking that he wouldn't call my name because I'm not Black. But then I hear him call my name for the next class. After that class, I went up to him and said, what did he expect me to talk about since I was not Black? He told me to talk about my experience in this class. So the next class, I was pretty nervous. I did have a few friends in the class, but there were some very hostile students. So I don't remember what I started to say, but one Black student started yelling at me, and I'm sure I turned bright red. But some of the students and the professor told him to be quiet. I started talking again, and then the same student yelled out, asking, what if there was a war between the Blacks and the whites? Whose side are you going to be on? I remember that so clearly, and I just said, I am not a fighter, and people in the class began to clap. I don't remember anything after that except that I was able to end the class with an A. Did you ever receive pushback from colleagues or parents, and how did you respond? When I taught in Oakland, it was in a primarily Black school. There were a few teachers that I'm not sure why they were there. One in particular was from out of state, and I don't know if she knew where Oakland was when she applied for the job. She told me that I had to be careful because if you touch a Black child, you will turn Black. I hugged a Black child in front of her to prove her wrong. She didn't last very long. I worked hard to keep parents on my side. Do you participate in any forms of activism today? If so, what? Today I vote in every election. I write postcards to voters who aren't as active, and I talk to people about our country's situation to people about our country's situation all the time. I've gone to rallies and marches in the recent past, but recently have had my hip replaced along with both of my knees, so I'm not as mobile as I used to be. But I hope in the future I will be able to protest in a more visible way. So on this last slide, you can see the discussion questions posted one more time. Thank you all very much for listening to my